I have kept the ledgers of the Velorn Athenaeum for 11 years, and in all that time I never saw a man thrown out with such perfect, polished cruelty as the afternoon they put Sergeant Tobias Merk onto the cobbles like a delivery mistaken for the wrong door. I was standing at the clerk's rail with a pen still wet in my hand when it happened, and I have never forgotten the look on his face, which is to say, I have never forgotten the absence of a look, the way stillness can be its own answer to insult. My name is Wren Halloway, and I was the junior registrar that season, the one who logged arrivals and stamped the guest book and knew, better than the fine gentleman upstairs, exactly who did and did not belong. That is why what I am about to tell you sits so heavily on me. Because I knew, and I said nothing until the moment it no longer required saying. Let me set the scene as it truly was, not as the members told it afterward. The Velorn Athenaeum is not a palace. I want that clear from the start, because the whole trouble grew out of men who forgot it. It is a private society housed in a gray stone building 3 streets back from the river, with a marble hall, a reading room, a gallery of donated portraits, and a strong room in the cellar where the realm's better families lodged things too precious to keep at home. It is a place of subscriptions and seconded nominations and little brass nameplates, and its whole character is that it decides who is worthy of it. That is its business. That is, in a sense, all its business. And the men who ran its front hall had come to believe that the deciding was the noblest work in the kingdom. The morning had been ordinary. Rain earlier, then a hard, clean light coming through the tall windows, laying bright rectangles across the checkerboard floor. I remember the porter polishing the door brass. I remember the smell of the beeswax the maids used on the banister. And I remember the front desk being manned, as it too often was, by Mr. Corwin Pike, the head steward, and his shadow, an understeward named Dello who had learned every one of Pike's opinions and none of his years. At 2:15, a man came in from the street. He was tall but not showy about it. He wore a plain dark coat buttoned and a plain gray scarf and boots that had been cleaned that morning and had walked far enough to lose the shine. His hair was cut close. His hands were bare and steady. He carried nothing but a flat leather case under his arm, the kind a man carries when he is delivering something he does not intend to let out of his sight. He stopped just inside the door, took off no hat because he wore none, and waited to be seen. He did not push forward. He did not clear his throat. He simply stood, the way certain men stand, as if standing were a discipline they had been taught long ago and had never once let slip. I saw all of that in the first 2 seconds, and I will tell you what I concluded because it matters. I concluded that he was somebody. Not by his clothes, which said nothing, but by his stillness, which said everything. Men who fidget are men who are unsure of their place. This man was not unsure of anything. Pike saw him too, and Pike concluded the opposite. "Yes," said Pike from behind the desk, in the voice he kept for tradesmen and applicants, and anyone whose business he had already decided to find tiresome. He did not rise. He drew the guest book a fraction closer to himself, a small gesture that meant this book is not for you. "Good afternoon," the man said. His voice was low and even, a working voice, unhurried. "I've come on behalf of the Crown. There's a case lodged in your strong room under a royal seal, a restored piece, returned to your custody last month by the conservators. I'm to collect it and carry it back to the household. My name is Merk." Now, I want you to understand what those words should have set in motion. There was such a case. I had logged it myself. It had come in 6 weeks prior in a conservator's van, wrapped in wax cloth, and it had been entered under a specific ledger line with a royal warrant number and a note in the margin, my note, that read * release only to a crown-appointed bearer. The Athenaeum was proud of that deposit. The chairman had mentioned it at 2 dinners. It was the single most important object in our cellar, and it was to be given up to a man sent by the household. This was that man. He had said so plainly, and there was a way to check it. The warrant, the seal, the countersigned bearer's slip, all of which I would have staked my post he was carrying in that flat leather case. But Pike had already stopped listening at the word crown, because Pike heard, in that word, not authority but pretension. He had spent 30 years watching men try to borrow importance they did not own, and he had grown so proud of catching them that he had lost the ability to imagine a man who actually possessed it. On behalf of the crown, Pike repeated, and let a small cold smile find the corner of his mouth. How grand! And you have what? A letter, an appointment, a member to vouch for you. I have a warrant, Merrick said, and a bearer's slip under seal. If you'll send for your registrar, I'll present them to the person who logged the deposit. That's the proper way to do it, and I'd rather do it properly. He was right. It was the proper way, and it was my name he was asking for. I actually took a half step forward from the rail. But Dello, the under-steward, chose that instant to lean in and murmur something to Pike behind his hand, and Pike's face changed, hardened, the way a man's face hardens when a subordinate has confirmed the very suspicion he wanted confirmed. I learned later what Dello had whispered. He had whispered that the man's boots were worn and his coat was off the peg, and that a real crown officer would have come in a carriage with a footman, not walked in off the wet street like a courier. That was Dello's whole evidence. The boots. And Pike, who prized appearances the way a miser prizes coin, found it sufficient. I don't think so, Pike said, and now he did rise slowly to give the refusal its full ceremony. I think you've read about our little deposit in some broadsheet. It was mentioned, I'm aware, and I think you've come to see whether a plausible manner and a borrowed word would carry you past the desk. It's a common trick. You are not the first. Good day. Merrick did not move. Send for your registrar, he said again, and there was no heat in it, only the flat patience of a man restating a fact. That's all I'm asking. One question to one person settles this. The registrar answers to me, Pike said, and I have settled it. There is no appointment in the book for a Mr. Merrick. There is no member's name attached to you. You have shown me nothing but your own word, and your own word, sir, is exactly the thing in question. He flicked 2 fingers toward the door, the gesture a man uses to move a cat off a chair. Dello, see him out. And here is the part I have turned over 1,000 times since. I had the ledger open in front of me. I could have crossed the 10 feet of marble in 3 strides and said, Mr. Pike, this is the man. That is the deposit. I logged it. Let him show the warrant. Every word of it was true, and I had the authority to say it, because verifying bearers was literally my task. But Pike was my superior, and Pike had that particular set to his jaw that everyone below him had learned to read as a closed door, and I was 26 years old and frightened of him, and so I did the smallest, most cowardly thing a person can do. I looked down at my ledger. I pretended to be busy. I let it happen. Dello came around the desk with 2 of the hall porters behind him, and they moved on Merrick the way men move on someone they have decided in advance will not fight, shoulders squared, a little too close, hands already half raised. You'll want to leave quietly, Dello said, or you'll leave the other way. Merrick looked at them. He looked at the porter's hands and at Dello's face and at the flat leather case under his own arm, and I watched him make a decision that I did not understand until much later. He could have resisted. I do not mean he could have brawled. I mean he could have raised his voice, planted his feet, demanded the chairman, made a scene loud enough that someone with sense would have come running. Any ordinary man defending his dignity would have done exactly that. He did none of it, because, and this I only understood afterward, the case under his arm held the restored honor of a dead queen, sealed by the crown, and a man carrying such a thing does not brawl in a marble hall over the brass nameplates of small men. To fight would have been to put the case at risk, to let it be jostled and grabbed in a scuffle over his own pride. And his own pride, weighed against that object, was not worth a feather. So he chose the object. He tucked the case more firmly against his side, turned his shoulder to shield it, and let them steer him toward the door. Take the case, Dello said suddenly, greedy for a victory. if there's stolen property in it. You will not touch this, Merrick said. He said it quietly, but something came into his voice on those 5 words that had not been there before, not anger, nothing so loose as anger, but a kind of absolute floor, a place past which a thing would not be permitted to go. Dello's hand, which had actually risen toward the leather, stopped in the air. The porters stopped. For one full second the whole hall seemed to understand that whatever this man's name was, he meant those 5 words the way other men mean their whole lives. Then the second passed, and small men are cowardly in a herd, and Dello, ashamed of having flinched, shoved harder at Merrick's shoulder to prove to the porters and to himself that he had not been afraid. They put him out, not gently. The big door swung and the clean, cold river light came in, and Sergeant Tobias Merrick went down the 3 worn steps to the cobbles with a porter's hand between his shoulder blades, and he caught himself, and he did not fall, and he did not turn around and shout, and he did not hammer on the door. He stood on the wet stones a moment, straightened his coat with one hand, kept the case tight with the other, and then, this is the detail that finished me, he stepped back against the railing, out of the way of the door, and he waited, as if he had all the time there was, as if he knew something the rest of us did not. Pike smoothed the guest book flat again and said, "To no one and to everyone, honestly. The nerve of them." And Dello laughed, the way a small dog barks after the danger has passed, and the porters went back to their posts, and I sat at my rail with a lie of a busy expression on my face and my heart going like a hammer, because I knew that a mistake had just been made that no smoothing of a guest book would undo. What none of us in that hall knew, what I would only learn as the afternoon unspooled, was who Sergeant Merrick actually was, and why the Crown had sent that particular man and no other to carry that particular case, and whose shadow was even then moving toward our gray stone door. Let me tell you about the case first, because everything turns on it, and because I am the one person left who logged it and read the margin notes, and therefore knew what the men upstairs had only half heard at dinner. The realm had lost its queen some years before, Queen Isolde, the king's first wife, dead too young and mourned more truly than mourning usually runs. She had been, by every account I ever heard, a woman of uncommon plainness of heart in a place not known for it. And among the things she left was a decoration, not a crown jewel, nothing that glittered for its own sake, but a small honor she had caused to be struck during her life, a medal given, at her own insistence and expense, to those who had served the household not with grandeur but with faithfulness. The Faithful Service Medal, people called it, though its proper name was longer. She had designed it herself. She had pinned it with her own hands on old cooks and long-serving grooms and night porters who had carried lamps for 40 years. And she had cared more, they said, for that little ceremony than for half the state occasions of her calendar. The master die from which those medals were struck, the original, engraved by the Queen's own chosen artist, the thing from which every future Faithful Service medal would forever be made, that die, together with the Queen's own first struck example and her hand-written roll of the first recipients, had been kept as a single sacred object. The Isolde charge, it was called in the household books. And some months back, the die had begun to show the fine cracks that time works into even the hardest steel, and the whole charge had been sent quietly to the conservators to be stabilized and preserved, so that the Queen's faithfulness honor would outlast every soul now living. The conservators, when the work was done, had lodged the restored charge, for reasons of security, at a moment when the palace strong rooms were being refitted, in the one place in the city with a strong room the household trusted, and a discretion the household relied upon, the Velorn Athenaeum. It was to sit in our cellar for exactly 6 weeks. And at the end of the 6 weeks, a bearer appointed personally by the Crown Prince would come to collect it and carry it home, so that the first medal struck from the restored die could be given, in a small private ceremony, to mark the anniversary of the Queen's death. That was the deposit Corwin Pike had just refused to release. That was the case Dello had reached for. That was the little broadsheet story the head steward imagined a swindler had come to exploit. And the bearer the crown prince had personally chosen, the one man he trusted to carry his mother's honor across the city and place it into his own hands, was the tall, plain-coated man now standing on our wet cobbles, put out of the building like a beggar, waiting against the railing with the whole of it sealed, and warranted inside a flat leather case that no one had let him open. I did not know all of that yet. I knew half of it, the ledger half, the deposit and the warrant line and the margin note in my own hand, and that half alone was enough to keep me sick at the rail for the next hour. But the other half, the half about the man, I had to learn the way everyone else learned it, slowly, and then all at once, and to my lasting shame not soon enough to have spared him the insult. Here is how the hour went, minute by minute, because I have gone over it so many times I could recite it in my sleep. For the first quarter of an hour, nothing happened, and the nothing was itself remarkable. Merck stayed on the cobbles. Through the tall window beside my rail I could watch him without seeming to, and I did, unable to look away. He did not pace. He did not glare up at the building. He did not accost the members who came and went through the door, and several did, in their fur collars, stepping around him with the small distaste of the comfortable passing the unwanted. He stood against the iron railing with the case across his body and his weight balanced, and his eyes moving, always moving, in the slow economical sweep of a man reading a street the way most of us read a page. He was not sulking out there. He was keeping watch over the case, over the door, over the flow of the afternoon, and I understood, watching him, that whatever else he was a man who had been trained until watchfulness had become the shape of his rest. A boy came by selling roasted chestnuts. Merck bought a paper twist of them and ate a few and gave the rest to the boy's smaller companion, and did it without making a show of it, and I thought, swindlers do not do that. Swindlers, caught out and ejected, slink away or curse or come back with a confederate. This man had bought chestnuts and settled in to wait, as calm as a sentry who knows the relief is coming even if he cannot yet see it on the road. Inside, meanwhile, the little kingdom of the front hall celebrated its victory in the small ways such kingdoms do. Pike told the story twice within the hour, each time a little larger. In the second telling, the swindler had practically forced the desk, and Pike had sent him packing without so much as raising my voice, and Dello, standing at his master's elbow, nodded along and added his own gilding, the worn boots, the shifty way he clutched that case, the obvious sham of the sealed warrant claim. They had a wonderful time. 2 porters were summoned to confirm how firmly the fellow had been removed. A member paused to congratulate Pike on his vigilance. The head steward accepted it as his due. I want to be fair, even now, even to them. They were not monsters. They were something more ordinary and more dangerous than monsters. They were men whose whole importance came from a door, from being the ones who decided who passed it, and a man had walked up to that door claiming an authority higher than the door itself, higher than the Athenaeum, higher than Pike's 30 years, and that claim, if true, made all of them small. So they needed it to be false. Their comfort required it to be false. And a man's comfort, once it needs a thing to be false, will believe almost anything that keeps it so: a pair of worn boots, an off-the-peg coat, the absence of a carriage. That is how a whole hall of grown men can look at genuine authority and see a trick, and feel proud of themselves for seeing it. I have watched it happen, and I still do not fully understand it, except that fear of one's own smallness will make a clever man stupid faster than anything else in the world. At 2:30, the chairman came down. His name was Lord Halbrook, a stooped, careful old gentleman who chaired the Athenaeum's board and took his position with a seriousness the younger members found quaint. He came down the marble stair with a folded paper in his hand and a frown on his face, and he went straight to the front desk, and he said, "Pike, the household's man, is he here, the bearer for the Isolde deposit? I've had word he's expected today, and I want to receive him myself, properly, given what it is." and I watched the color go out of Corwin Pike's face like wine out of a tipped glass. "The bearer, my lord," Pike said. "The crown's bearer," said Lord Halbrook a little sharp, "for the sealed charge in our strong room. It goes back to the household today. The Crown Prince's office wrote to confirm the collection this morning. I have the letter here. A single appointed man warranted to carry it. I'll not have it handed over at a common desk. I want it done with the dignity the thing deserves. Now has he come?" The hall had gone very quiet. Dello had found something to study on the floor. And Pike, I will give him this one particle of credit, Pike did not in that moment lie. He was too frightened to lie. He opened his mouth and what came out was the truth, in a voice suddenly stripped of all its polish. "A man came, my lord, just past 2. He said he'd come on behalf of the Crown for a case in the strong room. He had no appointment in the book. No member vouched for him. His manner was his clothes were plain, and I judged—" Pike stopped, swallowed. "I judged him an impostor, my lord, and I had him put out." For a moment Lord Halbrook did not seem to understand the words. He looked at Pike the way you look at a man who has told you something that cannot be so. Then understanding arrived, and with it a kind of horror that aged his old face 10 years in a breath. "You had him put out," Halbrook said, "the Crown's warranted bearer. For the late Queen's own charge. You put him onto the Asterisk Street." "My lord, he had no—" "Did he say a name?" Halbrook's voice had dropped to something terrible and low. "The bearer, the office named him to me. Did he give a name?" And now I could hold my tongue no longer because the name was mine to give. I had it in my ledger in my own hand, and my cowardice at the desk had already cost this man an hour of standing in the cold, and I would not add to it. I stood up from my rail so fast my stool scraped, and every head turned, and I said, louder than I meant to, "Merk, my lord." He said his name was Merk, and it's the true name. It's in my book against the deposit, release only to a Crown-appointed bearer. I logged it myself 6 weeks ago. He asked twice for me to be sent for. He offered to show a warrant and a bearer's slip under seal to me, the registrar, the proper way. And Mr. Pike refused to send for me and had him put out, and my voice cracked on it. I said nothing. I sat here and I said nothing, and I am ashamed of it. You could have heard a pin drop on the marble. Lord Halbrook turned his whole stooped body toward me and fixed me with pale old eyes, and for a moment I thought he would strike me down with a word. But he only said, very quietly, "Is he still out there, Halloway? The man on the cobbles? Is he still there?" I looked past them all, through the tall window to the wet street. He was still there. Sergeant Tobias Merk stood against the iron railing exactly where they had put him an hour before, the case across his body, his eyes on the door, waiting with a patience that no longer looked to me like patience at all, but like something closer to asterisk faith. The faith of a man who has carried harder things through worse places than a member's hall and knows, with the certainty of long service, that the truth will come to the door in its own time, and that his only duty until it does is to keep his charge safe and his feet planted, and his temper his own. "He's still there, my lord," I said. "Then go," and Halbrook began, and got no further, because at that exact moment the whole street outside the tall windows changed. It changed the way a room changes when someone important walks in before you have seen them, a shift you feel before you understand. The flow of foot traffic on the cobbles broke and eddied. Heads turned, out on the street, all in one direction. A pair of dark, plain, well-kept horses came into the edge of my window's frame, drawing a carriage without crest or gilding, but with an unmistakable quality to it, the quality of a thing built for someone who has no need to announce himself with paint. And around and behind it, moving at the same unhurried pace, came men, 4 of them, then 6 in dark coats, walking with the same economical watchfulness I had been marveling at in the man on the cobbles for the last hour, because of course they were his brothers in it. They were of the same cloth exactly. The carriage stopped, a door opened, and the whole of the Velorn Athenaeum's proud front hall, from Lord Halbrook down to the porters, went to the windows or to the top of the steps to see who in the world had come to our gray stone door in the middle of an ordinary afternoon. I will tell you who had come. But first I have to tell you what he did before anyone in our hall had even reached the door, because it is the thing the members talked about for a year afterward, and it is the true center of this whole account, and I saw it with my own eyes through the tall front window with the beeswax-smelling banister at my back. The young man who stepped down from that plain fine carriage did not look up at the building. He did not look for the chairman, or the desk, or the important men gathering at the top of the steps. He looked first and only at the plain-coated figure standing against the iron railing with a leather case across his body. And Sergeant Merrick, seeing him, came off the railing and straightened, not the flinch straighten of a caught man, but the clean, snapping, whole-bodied straightening of a soldier coming to attention. And the young man crossed the wet cobbles to him directly, past the gathering crowd, past the astonished members, and he did a thing that no one in that street had expected, and that I will remember to the end of my days. He took the guard's free hand in both of his own, and he gripped it, and he said something to him. I could not hear the words through the glass, but I could read the shape of it on his face. And then, still holding the man's hand, the young man turned and looked up for the first time at the front steps of the Velorn Athenaeum, at Lord Halbrook and Corwin Pike and Dello, and all the rest of us frozen there in the door, and his face was no longer warm at all. It was the face of the Crown. Crown Prince Rowan was, that season, a man just past 30, and I had seen his likeness in the illustrated papers and once, at a distance, at a public procession. But no likeness had prepared me for the plainness of him in person, which is a strange word for a prince, but the right one. He wore no ceremony. His coat was dark and good and unadorned. He had come, I understood later, straight from the household with the intention of receiving his mother's charge from the hands of the man he had sent for it, and he had come without fanfare precisely because the errand was a private and a tender one, an anniversary matter, a thing between a son and the memory of his mother. He had expected to meet Merrick at the strong room, take the case, and go quietly home. Instead, he had come around the last corner to find his own bearer standing in the cold street outside the locked door, put out like a vagrant. I have wondered since how he knew, at a glance from a moving carriage, that something was wrong. But I think the answer is simple, and I think it is the whole answer to this entire story. He knew because he knew Merrick. He knew the man's face and the man's stillness and the exact quality of that particular way of standing. And he knew, instantly, the way you know a wrong note in a tune you love, that the man he had trusted with the most precious errand of the year was standing on the asterisk outside of a door he should have been received through an hour ago. And that meant, without a single word being spoken, that someone inside that building had made a grievous mistake. He came up the 3 worn steps still holding Merrick's hand, and he brought the guard up with him, so that they arrived at the top together, and the members parted before them like water. And when the Crown Prince reached the head of the steps and turned to face the gathered hall, he did not raise his voice. I have noticed that truly powerful people almost never do. It is the small and the frightened who shout. He spoke quietly, and the quiet made every man there lean in and go cold. "Which of you," said the Crown Prince, "put this man out of your door?" No one answered. Lord Halbrook, to his eternal credit, stepped forward at once, the only man in that hall who moved asterisk toward the danger rather than away from it, and bowed, low and old and stiff. "Your Royal Highness," Halbrook said, "the fault is the House's, and as chairman the fault is mine to answer for. This man came at 2 o'clock on the Crown's business, and he was refused and removed by my staff, in error, before I knew of it. I have this moment learned the truth of it, and I was on the point of going out to him myself. There is no excuse I can offer that is worth your hearing. Only my deepest, my most abject apology to your Highness and to this man, whom the House has wronged." The Crown Prince looked at him a long moment. Then he looked past him at Pike. Corwin Pike had gone the gray of the building's own stone. He had understood by now the full and irreversible size of what he had done, and it was destroying him where he stood. He tried to bow, and it came out as a kind of collapse. "Your Highness," he managed. The man's manner, his clothes were plain, he had no appointment in our book, I could not have known. "You could have known," the Crown Prince said, "in the time it took to send for your registrar and let him show you the warrant he offered you twice. He asked you to do the one correct thing, and you refused, and you had him thrown into the street. So do not tell me you could not have known. Tell me instead why a warranted seal and a plainly stated errand counted for nothing in your house, and a pair of worn boots counted for everything." Pike had no answer. There is no answer to that. It is the whole indictment of his kind, put into one clean question, and he stood inside it with his mouth open and nothing coming out. Now the Crown Prince turned at last to Merk himself, and everything in his face changed again, the cold falling away, something older and warmer coming up in its place. And what he said next, he said not quietly at all. He said it so that the whole hall, and the crowd now thick on the cobbles below, and every fur-collared member at every window, would hear it and carry it out into the city, because he meant it to be carried. "Let me tell you who this man is," said the Crown Prince, "since your house was so certain he was nobody. This is Sergeant Tobias Merk of the King's Own Guard. He has stood at my family's gates and doors for 19 years. He carried my father's colors through the flood country, the year the river took 3 villages, and he pulled 2 of my father's household out of a drowned house with his own hands, and he never once spoke of it, so you may be sure you never read it in a broadsheet. He was decorated for it. He wears the ribbon under that plain coat you found so unconvincing, because men of his kind do not wear their honors to the shops. When my mother, the Queen, was living." Here, for the first time, the Crown Prince's steady voice caught, just slightly, and steadied itself again. "When my mother, the Queen, was living, she trusted 3 people in this world without reserve, and this man was one of the 3. She trusted him because he was the sort of man who, when the faithful service medal she cared so much about was being handed out to old grooms and night porters, would stand at the back and see to it that the frailest of them had a chair and a hand to lean on, and would never once put himself forward for notice. That is the kind of man you threw into the street this afternoon for the crime of having walked here on his own 2 feet. And do you know why I sent him, of all my household, to fetch my mother's charge home to me?" The Crown Prince's eyes moved slowly across the frozen hall. "Because there is no man alive I trust more to carry it. When I could not decide whom to send, I did not choose the grandest or the highest born of my people. I chose the most faithful. I chose the one my mother would have chosen. And your house looked at the most faithful man I know and saw a beggar because his boots were worn from doing his duty." The silence in that hall was the loudest silence I have ever stood inside. Then the Crown Prince did a small thing that undid the last of Corwin Pike, and I think undid something in every man watching. He turned fully to Merk, and he inclined his head to him, a prince, bowing his head, a small clean bow of respect, to a sergeant of the guard in a plain wet coat, and he said, in a voice pitched only for the 2 of them but heard by all, "I'm sorry, Tobias. You should never have had to stand out there, not you, not for my mother's honor. Not for anything." And Sergeant Merk, who had stood unmoved through insult, through the shove and the steps and the cold hour on the cobbles, Sergeant Merk's composure very nearly broke now at the apology in a way it had not broken at any of the injuries. His jaw tightened. He blinked once hard. And then he did the only thing his discipline would permit him to do with a feeling that large. He came to attention, and he answered his prince the way he had answered everything all afternoon, plainly, briefly, and from a place too deep for the small men to have ever reached. "I was where I was meant to be, your Highness," Merk said. "Between the Queen's honor and the door, that's the post. I'd stand it again. I have thought about that sentence for years. Between the Queen's honor and the door. That's the post. He had not understood himself, out there on the cobbles, as a humiliated man waiting for rescue. He had understood himself as a sentry who had simply been moved, against his will, to the wrong side of a threshold, and whose duty was therefore to guard that threshold from the wrong side until the situation righted itself. The insult had never touched the core of him, because the core of him was not concerned with his dignity at all. It was concerned with the case, and the case was safe. So he had, in his own accounting, won quietly, completely, an hour before anyone else in the building knew a contest had been running. That was the moment I stopped being merely ashamed of what I had done and started to understand what I had been in the presence of. But the afternoon was not finished, because there was still the matter of the charge itself, and the strong room, and the small procession we all now made down into the cellar. And there, below the marble and the beeswax and the little brass name plates, one more turn of the day was waiting that not even the Crown Prince had foreseen. Lord Halbrook led the way, with the great iron strong-room key that only the chairman carried. The Crown Prince went beside Merk. I came behind with the ledger, because it was my ledger that recorded the deposit, and it was I who would sign the release. And behind me trailed Pike and Dello, no longer masters of anything, small and gray and following, because no one had told them they might go. The strong room sat at the bottom of a curling stone stair, behind a door of banded iron, in the cold, dry air that old cellars keep. Halbrook worked the key, and the door swung, and the lamps went in, and the strong room opened before us, its walls of numbered pigeonholes and its shelves of lodged boxes, and in the place of honor at the center, on a low table by itself, the waxcloth-wrapped shape of the Isolde charge exactly where it had sat for 6 weeks. Or so it should have been. Merk reached it first. He had not been asked to, he simply moved, the way he had moved toward the case all afternoon, and he set his own leather satchel down and lifted the waxcloth wrapping, and I saw his shoulders change. Just slightly. The way a still man changes when something is wrong. "Your Highness," he said quietly, "this is not right." The Crown Prince was at his side in a stride, and I, coming up behind with the lamp, saw it too, and my stomach turned over. The wrapping was there, the outer box was there, but the box had been asterisk opened. The crown seal that should have run unbroken across its seam, the very seal I had entered in my ledger, the seal whose integrity was the whole point of the deposit, the seal was slit, not torn as if by accident. Slit cleanly with a fine blade, and then pressed back together so that it would pass a careless glance. And when Merk lifted the lid, the interior tray was there, and the Queen's handwritten roll of first recipients was there, and the Queen's own first struck medal was there in its recess. But the master die, the engraved original die, the irreplaceable heart of the whole charge, the thing from which every future medal of faithfulness would forever be struck, the die was gone. In its fitted velvet bed, there was only the shape of its absence. I heard Lord Halbrook make a small broken sound. I heard Pike, behind me, whisper no, as if the word could put it back. And I felt the whole afternoon tip from one kind of story into another and worse one, because it was one thing for a house to have insulted the Crown's man at the door, that was a shame, but a shame that could be apologized for. It was another thing entirely for the Crown's own mother's sacred charge to have been robbed out of that house's strong room, under that house's seal, in that house's care. That was not a shame. That was a catastrophe. And every man in that cellar knew, in the same instant, that the missing die changed everything. The Crown Prince went very still. When he spoke, his voice had gone quiet again in that dangerous way. "Who has been into this room in 6 weeks?" "No one, Your Highness," Halbrook said ashen. "No one, but the key is mine alone, the chairman's key. It does not leave me, there is no other." "There is at least one other," Merk said. He had not stopped studying the box. He turned it slightly toward the lamp and pointed with one gloved finger at the slit seal. "That was done with care and with time by someone who was not afraid of being disturbed. Someone who knew the room, knew the deposit, and knew he would not be walked in on. This was not a snatch. This was patient. He looked up and his eyes went not to Pike, not to Halbrook, but past them, to the understeward standing gray and sweating at the back of the little crowd. To Dello. "You reached for this case in the hall," Merrick said, and his quiet voice went across the cellar like a laid ruler. "Before I had said one word about what was inside it, you reached for it and you said, if there's stolen property in it. Stolen. That was your word. I've turned it over for the last hour because it was an odd word for an honest man to reach for. How did stolen property come so quickly to your mind, when all I'd said was that I'd come from the Crown for a deposit?" Every eye in the cellar swung to Dello. And Dello, who had been so brave when he had porters at his back and a plain-coated man to shove, Dello went to pieces the way the guilty always do when the shape of the thing finally faces them. His mouth worked. His hands came up. I only meant you can't." And the more he denied it, the more the denial convicted him, until the Crown Prince said, very softly, "Search him." And two of the dark-coated men who had come in from the street stepped forward, and Dello broke entirely and put his back to the pigeonholes and cried, "It wasn't meant to be asterisk this. I didn't know it was the Queen's. I was only told to lift the die and pass it on. I owed a man money. He said no one would ever miss one bit of old steel out of a box that nobody opens. I didn't asterisk no asterisk." So there it was. The understeward, drowning in a debt he had hidden from everyone, had been used, by someone outside the house who knew what the Athenaeum was holding, to slip the one irreplaceable object out of the charge and pass it on to be sold or ransomed or melted, on the reasoning that an old sealed box in a cellar would sit unexamined until long after the trail had gone cold. He had counted on exactly the thing the whole house prided itself on, that no one questioned, that no one checked, that a sealed and lodged deposit was simply trusted. And he would very likely have gotten clean away with it, for weeks or months, except that the Crown had sent to collect the box, the one man in the kingdom too faithful to hand over a wrong deposit without lifting the lid, and too observant to miss a slit seal, and too patient to have let an odd word like asterisk stolen asterisk pass unremembered. The very qualities the house had thrown out into the street at 2 o'clock were the only qualities in the building capable of catching the thief by 3:30. I do not think anyone but Merrick had fully grasped that yet, but I had. Standing there with the lamp shaking a little in my hand, I understood that if Corwin Pike had done the simple correct thing at the desk, sent for me, let the warrant be shown, released the box across the counter with a bow and a flourish, then the box would have gone home to the palace, still sealed, still looking whole, and it might have been days before anyone opened it and found the heart of it gone and the trail stone cold. Pike's contempt had, by the strangest turn, nearly buried the theft. And Merrick's care had, by the same turn, uncovered it within the hour of arriving. The proud men had almost lost the Queen's die forever. The man they scorned had saved the chance of getting it back. "Where is it now?" the Crown Prince said to the weeping Dello. Not a question. A demand with a floor under it, exactly like the floor I had heard in Merrick's 5 words at the door. "I passed it last night. He was to collect it tonight. He hasn't. It's not gone yet. It's not." Dello gulped. "It's still in the city. There's a man, a yard by the river. He hasn't sold it on. He was waiting for tonight. I swear it on my life it's still in the city." The Crown Prince looked at Merrick. And Sergeant Tobias Merrick, who an hour before had been standing in the cold with a porter's hand between his shoulders, straightened once more into that clean whole-bodied attention, and said the second sentence of his that I will carry to my grave. "Then it isn't lost yet, Your Highness. Give me till dark." What followed, I did not see all of with my own eyes. I had a ledger to keep and a house in an uproar to manage, but I have pieced it together since from Merrick himself, from the dark-coated men who went with him, and from the plain testimony that came out when the whole matter was set right. I set it down here as faithfully as I can, because it is the part where the man the house called nobody showed, at last, exactly what he was made of. The crown prince did not simply send Merk off alone. He would not risk his mother's die on a single pair of hands, however trusted, but neither would he turn it into a great blundering commotion that might spook the receiver into fleeing with the die or destroying it. So he did what men of real authority do. He applied exactly as much force as the moment required and not 1 ounce more. He kept the noise out of it. 4 of his household men, the dark-coated watchers who had come with the carriage, went with Merk. Word went, quietly and by a private channel, to the river magistrate's men to have a boat and a warrant ready but to hold, and to move only on Merk's signal. And Dello, weeping and useless, was made to give up the name of the yard and the man and the hour, and then handed into keeping, so that he could send no warning ahead. Merk asked for one thing more before he went. He asked to take the asterisk box, the open charge, minus its stolen heart, with him. Lord Halbrook nearly refused. It was the most precious thing his house had ever held, even wounded as it was, and to let it back out the door seemed madness. But the crown prince understood at once and nodded because he understood Merk. "You mean to make the receiver believe the sale is going through," he said. "I mean to give him a reason to bring the die out into the open with his own hands," Merk said. "A man who is fencing stolen goods trusts nothing he hasn't seen. If he thinks a buyer has come with the rest of the set and the money, he'll want to match the die to the box before he'll take a coin for it. He'll bring it out himself. And then it's in the open, and then it's ours. If we go in cold, kicking the yard gate, he drops it in the river or into a furnace and it's gone forever, the Queen's die, melted for the theft of an afternoon. We don't go in cold. We give him a reason to hold it in his hand where I can see it." I have never forgotten the calm of that. He was not thinking of catching the villain. Any watchman thinks of catching the villain. He was thinking, first and last and only, of the asterisk die, of getting the Queen's irreplaceable honor back into safe hands unharmed, and he had grasped, faster than anyone, that the way to do that was not force but patience, the same patience that had kept him standing quiet on the cobbles for an hour. The receiver's own greed and suspicion would be made to do the work. It was the reasoning of a man who had guarded precious things his whole life, and understood that the point of a guard is not to win a fight. It is to bring the precious thing home whole. So they went down to the river as the light was failing. The yard was a low brick place among the boat repairers, with a chained gate and a single lamp, and a man in it named. It does not matter what he was named. He was a fence of stolen things who had thought a bit of old palace steel was easy money. Merk went in as the buyer's man, plainly dressed, unhurried, carrying the wounded box, and this is the part the household men told me with something like awe. Merk did it without a weapon shown, without a raised voice, without a single word of threat. He simply became, in that yard, exactly what he had been at the Athenaeum door, a still, plain, unremarkable man who was not the least bit unsure of his place. He set the box on the yard's work table. He said he'd been sent to complete the set, and that his master paid for the whole or nothing, and that he'd need to see the die matched to its bed before any money changed hands, because his master trusted nothing he hadn't seen. And the fence, greedy and suspicious exactly as Merk had foretold, went to his hiding place and brought out the Queen's master die wrapped in an oiled rag, and laid it on the table by the lamp, and bent to fit it into its velvet bed to prove the set was whole and the price was fair. He never fitted, because the instant the die was in the open, on the table in the lamplight, out of any hiding place and out of reach of the river and the furnace, the instant it was asterisk safe asterisk, Merk's gloved hand came down flat and firm over the die and the man's wrist both, pinning them to the table, and he said in that quiet voice with the floor under it, "That belongs to the crown. Don't move." There was a scramble, of course. The fence was not a gentle man, and he did not surrender for the asking. But it was over in seconds, and it was over without harm, because the 4 household men came through the gate on the word, and the magistrate's men came up from the boat, and the yard was closed like a hand, and no one was hurt, and this was the only thing Merrick cared about, and he confirmed it before he confirmed anything else. The die was unmarked. It had not been sold on. It had not been melted. It had not so much as a fresh scratch on its ancient engraved face. The Queen's faithfulness honor, from which every medal of the faithful would forever be struck, was whole, and it was, once more, in the hands of a man appointed by the Crown to carry it home. Merrick wrapped it in his own clean handkerchief before he would even wrap it in anything else, and carried it out of that yard against his chest, exactly the way he had carried the case across his body on the cobbles all afternoon, as if it were the only thing in the world, because to him, in that hour, it was. It was full dark when the carriage came back to the palace, and I was not there for that, but the Crown Prince told Lord Halbrook, and Lord Halbrook told me, what happened when Merrick placed the die into the Crown Prince's hands. The Crown Prince had waited up for it. He took the die and the box and the Queen's first medal and her handwritten roll, and he set the whole restored charge together on the table before him, complete again, unbroken again, and for a while he did not say anything at all. And then he said only, "Thank you, Tobias," and Merrick said, "Your Highness," and that was the entire ceremony of it, 2 men and a dead queen's honor and the plainest words in the language, which is, I have come to think, exactly the ceremony she herself would have wanted, she who cared more for the quiet faithful than for all the grand and glittering people in her calendar. The anniversary ceremony went ahead. The first medal struck from the restored die was given, as the Queen had always intended, not to a lord or a general, but to the oldest surviving night porter of the household, a man of 81 who had carried lamps through the palace corridors for 53 years and had never once been late to his post. And Sergeant Merrick stood at the back of that little ceremony, exactly as the Crown Prince had described him doing in his mother's day, seeing to it that the frail old man had a chair and a hand to lean on, putting himself forward for nothing, wanting nothing, simply standing his post between the honor and the door. Now I must come back to the Velorn Athenaeum and to the men who had thrown him out, because a story of this kind is not finished until the wrong is answered, and I want to tell it truly, without either softening it or turning it into cruelty. The Crown does not deal in cruelty. It never had to. There was no great public punishment of the house. The Crown Prince did not close the Athenaeum or ruin it or drag its name through the papers, though he could have done any of the 3 with a sentence. That was not his way, and I think it was not his mother's way either, and I think that restraint was itself a kind of judgment more lasting than any scandal. What he did instead was quieter and heavier. Dello, of course, answered to the law gently as such things go, for he had been a fool in debt rather than a hardened thief, and he had told the whole truth the moment it faced him, and the king's justice, administered through the proper court and not through any wronged man's temper, weighed all of that. He lost his place and his name at the house and served a term and paid what could be paid. But no one broke him beyond mending, because that too is not how the Crown does things. Corwin Pike was another matter, because Pike had committed no crime, only a great and revealing failure of the heart, and you cannot arrest a man for contempt. What happened to Pike was that Lord Halbrook, on behalf of the board, required him to stand in the front hall, before the assembled staff and several of the members, and here read aloud the full account of the afternoon. How the Crown's most trusted man had come to the door and asked, twice, for the one simple correct thing, to have the registrar sent for and be allowed to show his warrant. And how the head steward had refused it and mocked it, and had the man put into the street on the evidence of a pair of worn boots, and how that same scorned man had, within the hour, been revealed as a decorated servant of 19 years, the Queen's own trusted one, and had then gone on to recover from a river yard the very treasure the house's carelessness had let be stolen out of its own sealed strong-room. All of it, read aloud in the hall, with Pike standing there in his fine steward's coat, and no fine words left to him at all. And when it was done, Lord Halbrook said one thing more, and had it entered in the house's own book, so that it would outlast all of them. This house exists to decide who is worthy to pass its door. Today it looked at the worthiest man to come to that door in my lifetime and saw a beggar, because his boots were worn from doing his duty. Let it be written here, and let no steward of this house ever forget it. A man's worth is not on his feet. It is in how he stands. I watched Corwin pike through the whole of that reading, and I will not pretend I enjoyed it, though I had cause enough to. There is a satisfaction in seeing a proud man measured against a true one and found wanting, and I felt it, and I am not ashamed of feeling it. But I felt something else too, standing there with the ledger I had been too frightened to open at the right moment, and it was closer to a warning than a triumph, because I had done, in my small way, exactly what Pike had done in his large one. Pike had refused to see the man in front of him. I had seen him. I had known from the first 2 seconds that the plain-coated stranger was somebody, and I had said nothing, because a superior's frown frightened me more than an injustice troubled me. Pike's sin was contempt, mine was cowardice, and I have never been certain in all the years since which of the two is the worse. Contempt at least is honest about itself. Cowardice knows better and does nothing, which is why the cowards are always the ones who apologize afterward, and why the apology is always a little too late to matter. Pike did not stay at the house. He was not dismissed. Lord Halbrook, for all his hardness that afternoon, would not put a man of 30 years' service onto the street the way that man's own carelessness had put Merrick onto the street. The chairman had learned the day's lesson too. But Pike could not stay. He had been the man who decided who passed the door, and everyone in the building now knew the single most important decision he had ever made at that door had been the wrong one, made for the pettiest of reasons. And a man cannot go on turning people away in a place where that is the first thing anyone thinks when they see his face. He gave his notice within the month and went to live with a married sister in a town I never learned the name of. I heard, years later, that he had become quiet in his old age and gentle with tradesmen and couriers and anyone who came to a door looking plain, and that he never told the story of why. I choose to believe that means something. I choose to believe the reading in the hall reached him and changed him in the slow way that true corrections work. I may be wrong, but it costs me nothing to hope it, and it is more in keeping with everything else about that day to hope it than not. As for me, I did not escape my own reckoning, and I would not want you to think I did. When the household's business at the Athenaeum was concluded and the Crown Prince was leaving, he stopped at my rail. I had not expected him to. I was nobody in that hall, the junior registrar, the boy with the ledger, and I had braced myself to be, at best, overlooked, and at worst named as the clerk who saw and stayed silent. He stopped, and he looked at me, and I discovered that being looked at by the Crown Prince is a very direct experience that leaves you nowhere to hide. "You're the registrar," he said. "Holloway, you stood up in the end. You gave his name." "Too late, Your Highness," I said, because it was true and because I could not have said anything else with his eyes on me. I knew who he was from the moment he came in. I logged the deposit. I could have stopped it at the desk, and I was too afraid of Mr. Pike to open my mouth. I gave the name after he'd already stood in the cold an hour. That's not courage. That's just being unable to bear it any longer, which is a different thing. I do not know why I confessed all of that to a prince. I think it was because Merrick was standing 3 feet away, and I found I could not tell a comfortable half-truth in front of that man. His plain honesty made anything less feel like theft. The Crown Prince studied me a moment longer, and then he did a thing I have measured every act of my life against since. He did not comfort me, and he did not condemn me. He simply told me the truth, which is the rarest kindness the powerful ever offer the small. "You're right that it wasn't courage," he said. "You're wrong that it doesn't count. The courage would have been to speak at the desk, and you'll carry the fact that you didn't, and you should carry it lightly, but carry it. But most men who fail the first test fail the second one too. They stay silent, and then they stay silent again to cover the first silence, and they go on covering, And that's how a small cowardice grows into a large dishonesty over a lifetime. You broke the chain. You'd sat in the wrong for an hour and it became more than you could bear, and you stood up and told the truth against your own master to a room full of your betters, knowing it would cost you. That's not nothing, Holloway. That's the beginning of the thing you wish you'd had at the start. Most men never even get there. He nodded once, the same clean, economical nod he had given Merrick. Do better next time. There's always a next time. Guard your door as well as he guards his. And then he was gone, and the carriage was gone, and the gray stone hall was left to put itself back together around the hole the afternoon had torn in it. I did do better next time. I want to record that, not to praise myself, but because a story about a man who never wavered ought to end with at least one small proof that watching such a man can teach an ordinary one to waver less. I stayed at the Athenaeum. I rose in time to Halbrook's own chair. I am telling this to you now as the chairman of the house, an old man myself, with the great iron key on my own belt. And in all my years in this building, I have kept one rule above every rule in the book, and I have made every steward under me keep it, and it is the rule I learned on the wet cobbles outside our own door. No one is turned from this house on the evidence of their boots. Anyone may ask to have the registrar sent for. Anyone may show what they have come to show. The plainest man who walks in off the street is asked his business, and given the courtesy of an honest answer, because I know now, as I did not know then, that the world is full of men carrying precious things under plain coats, and a house that cannot tell the two apart has no business calling itself a judge of anyone. I saw Sergeant Merrick once more, some years afterward, near the end of his long service. He came to the Athenaeum on the Crown's business again, a different deposit, a different day, and this time, of course, the whole house knew him, and the porters came out, and I met him myself at the top of the steps and brought him in with my own hand on the door. He was grayer. He stood exactly the same. And when I tried, at last, to say the thing I had owed him for a decade, to apologize for the boy at the rail who had watched him thrown out and said nothing, he stopped me before I had got 3 words into it. You gave my name, he said. I heard you. Through the glass I couldn't hear the words, but I saw the young clerk stand up at his rail, and I saw the whole room turn to look at him, and I knew what that cost a boy your age in a house like this one. You think I stood out there feeling wronged? I didn't. I stood out there knowing the truth always comes to the door if a man is only patient enough to wait for it. And you were the truth coming to the door. You just took the long way. He almost smiled. Merrick did not spend smiles freely. I think I earned one of the few he had. The Queen used to say the faithful aren't the ones who never fail. They're the ones who come back. You came back, Chairman Holloway, that's the whole of it. Now is the registrar in. I've a case to lodge, and I'd like it done properly. I sent for the registrar. Of course I did. We did it properly, the two of us, the way it should have been done the first time, a lifetime before, the warrant shown, the seal checked, the ledger signed, everything in its honest order. And when it was finished, Sergeant Tobias Merrick took up his case and settled it against his body the way he always had, and went out through our door and down our 3 worn steps into the ordinary light of an ordinary afternoon, a plain man in a plain coat carrying something precious that the whole world would have walked straight past. I have kept the ledgers of the Velorn Athenaeum for a great many years now. I have logged the arrival of ambassadors and dukes and famous names, men who came through our door in carriages with footmen, certain of their welcome and receiving it. Not one of them taught me anything. The only lesson this house ever gave me that was worth the keeping, it gave me on a wet afternoon through a tall front window, when a man nobody would vouch for stood on our cobbles for an hour without complaint, and a prince came round a corner and knew him at a glance, and every proud face in the building learned in a single sentence what it had refused to see with its own eyes. That worth wears no uniform you can recognize from a desk, that the most faithful man in a kingdom may come to your door on his own 2 feet with his honors hidden under his coat, and that the surest way to know you are in the presence of someone truly great is that he will never once need you to know it. They kicked out a royal guard, thinking he was nobody. Then the crown prince showed up. And the whole of my life, everything I ever became worth being, began in the space between those two facts, in the hour I spent learning, too slowly and forever after, exactly how much a nobody can be.